This quick guide video demonstrates how to label the waveforms when calculating the SP-AP area ratio and the SP-AP amplitude ratio. There are two calculations that can be used when using ECoG to aid in the diagnosis of endolymphatic hydrops or Meniere's disease. These are the SP-AP amplitude ratio and the SP-AP area ratio. Both of these methods have been shown to be effective in assisting in the diagnosis of endolymphatic hydrops, but research suggests that the SP-AP area ratio does this with a higher sensitivity and specificity compared to using the amplitude ratio method. Despite this, both methods are still widely used today. In the 1970s, reports in the literature described that the SP-AP amplitude ratio could be used to assist clinicians in the diagnosis of endolymphatic hydrops, a feature of Meniere's disease. There are two ways in which the SP-AP ratio can be calculated, and both methods are available in the Eclipse software. The peak-to-trough method measures the peak-to-trough amplitude of the summating potential and compares this to the peak-to-trough amplitude of the action potential, whereas the baseline method looks at the ratio between the amplitude of the baseline to the summating potential and compares this to the amplitude between the baseline and action potential. The baseline is representative of the start of the response. It is typically around 0.5 milliseconds and is found just before the summating potential begins to displace the waveform. The peak of the summating potential is typically found at around 0.7 milliseconds in an individual with a normal electrocochleogram. It is a small deflection occurring immediately after the baseline. The large wave deflection occurring after the summating potential is the compound action potential. The peak typically occurs at around 1.2 to 1.5 milliseconds. Once these three landmarks have been marked, the system automatically calculates the SP-AP amplitude ratio. Published normative data suggests that ratios greater than 0.5 with the gold foil tiptrode and 0.35 with the tympanic membrane TM-trode are indicative of pathology. The SP-AP area ratio is a newer technique and has been verified as a tool for assisting in the diagnosis of Meniere's disease. This method takes into consideration the fact that in pathological ears, the summating potential not only increases in amplitude, but also becomes wider, thus an area approach is more effective at detecting pathology. This method has a reported sensitivity of 90% for detecting an abnormal response. The area ratio is calculated by firstly marking the start of the baseline, as previously described. To calculate the area, a baseline end marker will be placed automatically at the next point in the waveform where the potential crosses this baseline. If the waveform does not allow this, you can place the baseline end manually. The summating potential is labelled in the same way as in the SP-AP amplitude method. With the compound action potential, three parts of the curve need to be marked. The AP1, otherwise known as the beginning of the AP, is found just after the summating potential. The AP peak, which is the point where the amplitude is at its largest, is typically found around about 1.2 to 1.5 milliseconds. And lastly, the AP2 is where the action potential ends and changes direction. Once labelled, an area ratio is calculated automatically by the system. Ratios exceeding a value of 1.94 are indicative of pathology. This concludes this quick guide video on calculating the SP-AP amplitude ratio and the SP-AP area ratio.